prepared to stay.
My role in this conference is sort of like Joel Grey in Cabaret, to jump in whenever I need to, and Susan Glasser is wonderful. I wanted just to say, as I neglected, I want to shower with thanks and praise Christine Fair, who's joining us from UC Berkeley. Christine is Assistant Professor at Center for Peace and Security Studies at the Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown, author of Drone Wars, the article very provocative and important that recently appeared in Foreign Policy. I've been advised by our tech people, Christine, that while you speak, which if Susan Glasser encourages you to do, while you're speaking, just turn down the volume and it will cut down the feedback on your own computer. But now I turn it back to Susan.
Do you want her to go now?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, Christine, we're looking forward to hearing your thoughts as well on what are actual realistic options for proceeding at this point. Can you hear us?
Yeah, actually, is the audio okay? Because I hear there's just a lot of static on my connection.
Can you turn down the volume?
I'm trying to do that now.
I should be able to do it here.
Is that better?
A little bit more. A little bit more. It might be us, so we're gonna work on it.
Is that okay?
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that. I have this Jurassic netbook. I'm surprised it even works. It's a little better than a carrier pigeon.
Okay, we're good. We're good now.
Okay, so we're good now. So, I mean, obviously I've missed a good chunk of the portion because I was actually trying to sleep. So I have a little bit of concern that some of my points might be redundant. And I don't know the extent to which you guys had already spoken about the Pakistan issue, but this has been one of my longstanding critiques of expanding the counterinsurgency effort in Afghanistan has been because of the absolute impossibility of engaging Pakistan on this issue. In several conversations over the last few weeks surrounding the Raymond Davis issue and Pasha's visit, you once again hear this discussion of the so-called trust deficit. And I have always been critical of this construction. I remain so, because what strikes me is that this isn't a trust deficit. This is actually a certitude surplus. Right? Pakistanis understand that as we're trying to get an end state in Afghanistan figured out, that the space that we used to have to finagle important differences is really constricting. And so to put a fine point on that, our needs to go after the Haqqani network, obviously the Quetta Shora, which has now been relocated to Quram, Karachi, and elsewhere, and Pakistan's desire and indeed requirement to maintain these assets are really coming into sharp conflict. And over the last 10 years or so, what we've largely done is we've tried to finesse this. That yes, it's true that Pakistan and the United States, we have different strategic goals over some longer term time horizon, but on issues, for example, like Al-Qaeda, the Pakistanis are going to help us out. What has become increasingly clear over the last year or so is that Pakistan is trying to figure out a completely separate endgame in Afghanistan. Of course, they've always done this. But I think we would be behooved to try to understand what it is the Pakistanis are discerning, because I think it does reflect some of the conversations I picked up on the last 2 minutes of the previous speaker. I think was that Jim Dobbins?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. It sounded like you, but all I see is some dude in a purple tie and a beard sitting in front of me. So one thing I've noticed in my
no, she can't see us.
sorry, dude. One thing that I've noticed in the last year or so of my several trips to Pakistan is that the Pakistanis themselves are very worried about the remnants of the so-called Afghan Taliban, right? So one of the consequences of U.S. and NATO successful efforts at eliminating these different levels of leadership is that they've had to be replaced very quickly. And the people that are coming in to fill those billets hate the ISI, quite frankly, as much as they hate us. They have a different relationship with the ISI than the Al-Qaeda commanders of 10 years ago. They see Pakistan's role in Afghanistan as being manipulative, serving Pakistan's interests, but not that of Afghans. And so the Pakistanis themselves are trying to figure out, how do we regain the momentum, how do we regain control over this organization that has really evolved over the last 10 years, right? It's not the same organization that it was 10 years ago. So the very fact that Pakistan itself is scrambling to figure out its own end state about this organization, does strongly suggest that our strategies about thinking about the Taliban really need to change. And I think fundamentally, one of my biggest concerns about the expansion of the counterinsurgency effort really goes back to Pakistan, right? The more troops that we need to have on the ground there means that we're ever more dependent upon Pakistan, not less. And so these differences that were significant, but somehow finessable over the last 10 years have become much more difficult to finesse. And I'd like to add that, of course, it's no longer just issues around Al-Qaeda and the Taliban that we're very concerned about with Pakistan. We're also very concerned about Lashkar-e-Taiba, right? I mean, I don't know how much you guys have talked about the multiple security concerns that we have situated there in Pakistan, but there is this enormous irony from my point of view that we've chosen a strategy that says we need to stabilize Afghanistan so we can stabilize Pakistan, but in fact it's just the opposite. Whatever happens in Afghanistan is going to be to a very significant degree overdetermined by Pakistan itself. Right? That's my view. If you were to put your Pakistani goggles on for a second, since 9/11, its security equities have compromised more than they have been buttressed. So, for example, under the U.S. security umbrella, the Indians have been able to develop a presence in Afghanistan that they weren't able to develop before we were there. And so this gives rise to some, I think, a difference between what the Pakistanis say publicly and what they actually say privately. I know Kiani has said repeatedly, we need to have reassurance that you're going to be in Afghanistan in perpetuity. The White House somehow believes that by staying in Afghanistan, we're going to reassure the Pakistanis. It's actually just the opposite. I've been working with the Pakistan Army for a very long time now and spent quite a bit of time with a lot of them over the summer. I'm going back this summer. What's absolutely clear is that no matter what Kiani says, this is the way that many of the people that I've interacted with, including folks at the major level, they want us out. And they want us out for the reason that I just said. The longer we stay, the longer the Indians can basically free ride under our security umbrella, when in fact they simply want the Indians gone. So I see a huge number of discontinuities between our goals in Afghanistan and what we can accomplish when we consider what we're able to do with the Pakistanis. And I think at some point this last decade, wishful thinking about how we can bring the Pakistanis on board to get them to Seth Jones and I, a bunch of us have worked on how do you fundamentally reshape Pakistan's cost-benefit calculus around its current programs. And the approach the U.S. has adopted thus far, which is really about financial allurements, strategic conventional weapon systems, none of these things are adequate to convince Pakistan that its current approach is anything but helpful. So at what point do we really have to reconsider what we want to do and what we can do in Afghanistan when we have a more realistic understanding of what Pakistan is and will be, rather than the Pakistan that we aspire or hope to obtain through these various allurements? And so, going back to the theme of this, I've actually been a fairly strong proponent of this thing. I mean, a number of people have put it forward, Vice President Biden. I think there's a lot of merits to the counterterrorism plus notion. And I apologize, I didn't hear all of Dobbin's critique of it. But let me put out on the table why I think there's some advantages to this, although in some sense this train sailed, where we are where we are. By having a more easily sustainable footprint in Afghanistan, where we're not completely dependent upon Pakistan for the GLOCs, we're able to create a space where we can play more, we can play a harder ball game with Pakistan than we can right now. I'm not convinced that we cannot continue to go after Al-Qaeda without our counterinsurgency footprint for the following reasons. And we know that what's going on right now is a negotiation about a SOFA, a status of forces agreement. Karzai has no interest, and I can't imagine, let's start from a fundamental assumption. I think it's a low probability event, given even the abysmal operational capacity of the ANSF, that a return to the Taliban central government is even realistic. I take this off the table. So if there's a genuine possibility of the Taliban coming back, then my analysis it is absolutely pointless. So I'm going to take as a given that we're not going to have, Taliban 10.0, running the country from Kabul. So if we put that extreme outcome on the table, this is what I think could possibly work. Karzai has no interest in Al Qaeda coming back, and this we have fairly tightly aligned set of interest, right? So we negotiate through the process of the SOFA access to a number of important military bases from which we can continue to prosecute the counterterrorism mission, focusing on Al Qaeda. Now, I don't know, how much you guys talked about this before, but I am very strongly of the view that no matter how horrible the Taliban are, there is such enormous variation in the Taliban that it's very hard for me to say that the Taliban are any worse than some of the savages that we've made as our allies. So I find the moral arguments against the Taliban to be thoroughly unconvincing. And given that so many Afghans are opposed to the counterinsurgency, I'm also not convinced that once or if we were to scale back a counterinsurgency footprint, that our intelligence doesn't actually improve. So one of the arguments for maintaining the status quo or even escalating the counterinsurgency footprint is the quality of intelligence. I think it's a fairly specious argument to say that through our current operations we're getting, excessively high quality intelligence. I'm not persuaded by that. So, just sort of in conclusion, in making the defense for the counterterrorism plus, by getting out of a footprint that Afghans themselves seem to find so odious, and finding some midpoint of tolerance with the Taliban, I think it's entirely possible that our intelligence on Al Qaeda actually improves. And just in closing, I think realigning what our priorities in Afghanistan that focuses on Al Qaeda, not the Taliban, not only allows us to be in a less intense confrontation with Pakistan so that we can pursue our other objectives, which I think are far more important in Pakistan, frankly, than they are in Afghanistan. But ultimately, this becomes much more finessable in terms of money, lives, and the sorts of things that populations in Afghanistan, the United States, and Pakistan are willing to tolerate.
Christine, thank you so much. I know we can't see you, but we are very grateful for your provocative comments. And in fact,